So if you know me, you know that I love Star Trek. I like a lot of sci-fi, but I really like Star Trek because it's not a dystopia. It's a story set 200-300 years in the future where humanity has figured out war, poverty, hunger here on Earth, and we've set this new mission for ourselves to go out and explore the galaxy and meet other people and be curious about the universe. It's not a utopia that we don't have to work for, but it does the thing that I think good stories should do. It tells us who we are, what we're capable of, and what we can become. I've seen this in my own life. I partly went to Trent University out in Ontario because it's in this area where there's a cedar forest and there's a river that runs through campus, and there's this rowing program there. And I always thought rowing looked really cool. And I had friends who rowed, but I didn't really think that was something that I could do. I thought you had to be taller, buffer to do it. And then a couple years ago when I moved back to Edmonton after school, my friend Steve told me that he'd joined the Edmonton Rowing Club. And no offense to Steve, and I've told him this story, but he's not super tall. He's not super buff. So I thought, oh my God, if Steve can do it, maybe I can row. So I took a Learn to Row class, and this is one of my favorite things to do now. I row on the North Saskatchewan River. And if we're talking about climate change, I think that we can look to some stories from Edmonton's past to do this thing that stories should do, which is to tell us who we are, what we're capable of, and what we can become. So I want to talk about how we adapted to one extreme weather event back in 1915. So there's this very famous phone call that John Walter received in June 1915 from somebody in Rocky Mountain House, John Walter being the famous businessman whom Walterdale is named after. And the person on the other end of the line said, "My God, Edmonton, look out. The river is up 20 feet and still jumping." And they're upstream of us in Rocky Mountain House, so not long afterwards, they knew we were about to get hit by the same flooding event. So this area, these steamboats used to be tied to docks. The docks had washed away at this point. The steamboats were tied to trees. That's the high-level bridge, of course, behind. This is a shot of the low-level bridge, just to give you an idea of how high the water rose. The water is just below the deck. That's the Hotel McDonald in the background. And then you can see that pile of debris that's amassed around the bridge, and somebody both brave and foolish posing for a picture on top of it. This is a shot looking at the south bank of the river. And in the background, you can see the Knox Evangelical Free Church in Old Strathcona and the old Bohemian Brewery. And then in the river valley, you can see something you don't really see a lot of today, which is a lot of industry and a lot more housing. So when these floodwaters rose, they destroyed a lot of businesses, and some of the lumber yards and brickyards and dairy businesses, even when the waters receded, they moved out of the river valley permanently. It's estimated that around 2,000 people were displaced by this flooding event. Around 50 homes were completely destroyed or washed away. And this flood played a piece in the long-term transformation since colonization of the river valley from being this place of industry and housing for a lot of people who worked in the area and couldn't afford to live somewhere else into the parkland that we know today. Not the only piece. There are lots of other things along the road, but there had been this plan kicking around to maybe consider turning the river valley into a piece of parkland. And after the flood of 1915, the city of Edmonton started acquiring pieces of land, and in the later decades started working towards that vision of parkland for the river valley. Moving ahead to 1942. When you think of snow and Toronto, how many of you feel a little bit of sense of smug superiority? Because we've heard that story, right, about Toronto having to call in the Canadian Army to dig itself out of a snowstorm. I want to tell you a story that might undermine that sense of smugness that we have. In November 1942, a blizzard hit the city, and it hit us with such volume that the city was basically paralyzed. Milk deliveries, bread deliveries, emergency services couldn't get through on the roads. There's this great story from Nan Morrison in the book, Edmonton in Our Own Words. She talks about her dad shoveling his way out to get to the streetcar and realizing, oh no, the streetcars aren't going to be running. So he strapped on a pair of skis, tied his lunch pail around himself, and skied to work. Edmonton had snowplow equipment, but it was not equal to the task. So we needed help from the province of Alberta. They sent in plowing equipment from southern Alberta. We got help from the RCMP, digging people out on the highway. And yes, we had troops helping dig us out. And not only that, we had American troops helping us plow. Because in 1942, American soldiers were stationed in Edmonton to help build the Alaskan Highway. I think we're all glad that Edmonton's invested in snowplowing equipment these days. And Edmontonians are pretty good at adapting to extreme weather events. This is a certificate that the Journal gave out in 1969. If you'd endured the cold spell of 1969, you could request one of these certificates, which is pretty sweet. And in 1987, I think it's fair to say that we learned that we are not exempt from the possibility of a tornado disaster too, and we invested more heavily in early warning systems and in communication within the city to let people know. But you'll notice that all these stories are about Edmontonians responding to disasters after they've happened. And I think this is the challenge, is that we don't have a lot of stories of us being proactive yet. And I think that's our challenge, is we need to become the next story. We need to figure out this carbon problem. We need to figure out how to transform our industries. You know, when we talk about solar panels, when we talk about bike lanes, when we talk about adding new insulation to our homes, we need to think of those as our victory gardens, the little bit that we can do at home for the bigger battle, you know? Because how many of us think that we know what humans are capable of already? We think that maybe people are too selfish or too short-sighted to act on this. But sometimes all you need is a good story to tell us what we're capable of. So that's my challenge to you, is to become the next story.